Spoilers and offensive content to come.
So clearly this is the Sonic episode, right?
Oh, yeah, totally.
This is Two Fat Guys Talk, episode... Shit, I didn't look up the number. And today we are going to be talking about Castlevania. My name is Carlos.
This is Dave.
This is Dave, my compatriot.
That was Carlos.
Yes, excellent. The introductions are in order. Dave, where the hell have we been? So anyway, let's talk about Castlevania. What was your favorite Castlevania game, Dave? Think long and hard about this one. Which one just... I think I know what your answer is, and I'll tell you if I'm right or not, but the one that, when you think of Castlevania, this is the first thing that comes up, and the one that you would have just an easy time playing if you just had to, like, if someone was like, put a gun to your head, play any Castlevania game you want to completion, you know?
Well, that's easy. Symphony of the Night.
That's what I thought you were going to say.
Okay, the first Castlevania I really enjoyed would be Castlevania 2.
Yeah.
But Symphony of the Night just nailed it. It's not a perfect game like a lot of people seem to give it credit for, but Symphony of the Night just, it's got, between its mechanics, how well it controls, and the storyline that game had, what storyline it had, it just nails what it's got.
I think a lot of people would probably say if you cornered most gamers, they're going to say their favorite is Symphony of the Night. Mm-hmm. And while that's not my personal favorite, it's hard to argue against, because even though I do think it's a touch overrated, I still love it to death. It is still a very easy game to just pick up and play. Whether you play its original version or you play a randomized seed, which opens up an entirely new way to play the game. Symphony of the Night is just super solid all around. Like, it looks good. It continues the story of Alucard. It can be very emotional at times. It has, in my opinion, multiple very good English voice tracks, from old campy to new and better done, but lacking the old campiness.
Yeah. Die
Monster, you don't belong in this world. Brilliant lines from Richter at the beginning of that game.
And I mean, Symphony of the Night basically today defines what Castlevania became. Yeah. I mean, every game after it kept to the same kind of formula of the Metroidvania style.
Almost every game.
Almost every game. I mean, we are going to talk about those eventually.
Yes.
But yeah, no, Symphony of the Night is definitely a genre-changing experience. Yep. You can argue that Castlevania 2 did it first in Castlevania.
It spearheaded that, for sure.
But I would argue Castlevania 2 and Symphony of the Night are very different games.
If Castlevania 2 got remade now, it would be the same way that Castlevania 1 has been remade multiple times, then Castlevania 2 would be a modern Metroidvania with a full map. It would be a lot like Order of Ecclesia, where Simon goes across various areas, and they all have fully featured things. He has more power-ups than ever before. That's what that game would be.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And I would love to see that.
I would actually like to see that, too. Even though Castlevania 2 at the time was not my favorite, I would love to see a modern remake of it. It'd be pretty rad.
Yeah.
My personal favorite Castlevania is, you probably already know my answer here. It's Super Castlevania 4.
Yeah.
The first remake of Castlevania 1 out there. Originally, the English story made it seem like it took place after 2, but it's been since confirmed, no, it's a remake of the first game.
Yeah. Now,
this is a game that I also love to death and is also a little overrated too. It's a little tech demo-y. If anyone who's played Breath of the Wild or Tears of the Kingdom lately likes the game, but kind of feels like these games are more showpieces for what the Switch could do, that was Super Castlevania 4. It controls like a dream and has fantastic mechanics. And to this day, when I think of a Castlevania game that I just want to pick up and play, that's the one I always go to, because that's one that feels best for me.
Which version? The English or the Japanese versions?
I always pick the English version, but I do like the Japanese version's blood in the dungeon stage.
And the music?
No, you're thinking Castlevania 3. You're
Am
thinking Castlevania 3. Super Castlevania 4 had the same soundtrack in all regions. Castlevania 3 is the one where the Famicom version had an extra sound chip.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
Now, it is a little tech demo-y. The levels don't really take advantage of the 8-way whipping. And sadly, the 8-way whipping didn't really come back as a mechanic. They just, with Rondo of Blood and everything, they just kind of focused on the classic style, which was a bit of a shame. Still, though, that game is just an aesthetic masterpiece. It's so good to look at. The soundtrack is impeccable. It has my favorite rendition of Bloody Tears. It has some great memories for me. It was the first Castlevania game I really got into. And a lot of its sprite work still holds up. Some of it was still used in the various Metroidvanias all the way up to and including Order of Ecclesia.
I believe it.
The Slogren Gaibon designs, first of all, they came from that game. And their sprites were the same sprites they used in Symphony of the Night. These Super Nintendo sprites, right? So in a way, that kind of spearheaded a lot of the atmospheric Metroidvania vibe too. If Super Castlevania 4, if nothing else, was atmospheric.
I mean, that's also kind of a problem with Konami itself, though, because if Konami could reuse a sprite instead of redoing it, they would. They were kind of lazy on that regard.
Order of Ecclesia actually redrew a lot of things and used very few things from Symphony of the Night. But Portrait of Ruin, oh my god, that game reused so many things from Symphony and from Dawn of Sorrow. It's insane.
Yeah. And I mean, there was that multiplayer Castlevania that we had lots of fun with.
Castlevania Harmony of Despair.
Yep.
A very flawed but very fun multiplayer online game that
they could have kept it going for years and years, but got lazy.
They got lazy, and also the later stages were not as good as the early ones.
No, they weren't.
Because if you go play that game, the bosses of stages 1, 2, 3, and 5 they not only attacked you when you got to them, they would attack the level. You would have to traverse the level to fight the boss, like preventing the second stage boss from getting to the coffins.
Yes.
Or needing to deal with the third stage boss firing across the stage. But in all the rest of the stages, the boss stays confined to their room with only 2 exceptions, and I believe that's when Dracula will attack people who's just camping outside his door.
Yeah.
But that's it. Like, it was still a blast to play. I would love to see that game redone in some way. And maybe balance it a bit better, because Soma was so powerful.
Yes.
And everyone else wasn't.
Well, I mean, give me the Valman way, and I was pretty broken.
Dave, everybody would get the Valman way and be broken. You could give that game to a toddler, give them Valman way, and they're gonna fucking win. Valman way is the I win button, as long as you just keep pressing it.
In your opinion, what was the best era of Castlevania?
Well, let's define what the eras were, I think.
Okay.
I think broadly we have 4 eras of Castlevania, and this is just my opinion on the matter. The 8/16-bit era, which was more about solid platforming and challenge, but with all the tools you need to succeed.
Okay.
The Metroidvania era, which started with Symphony of the Night and ended with Order of Ecclesia.
Okay.
No, it really ended with Curse of Darkness, now that I think about it, because those were definitely still Metroidvanias. The Lords of Shadow era, which were 3 actually character action games that I think were probably better than most people thought, but not as good as anybody hoped they'd be. And then the current Dark era, where we really just look forward to the next Castlevania animated series, and that's what Castlevania is now.
Yeah, okay.
Which one's the best? I'm going to say from a mechanical standpoint, it's the 8 and 16-bit era. And I'm going to say from a popularity standpoint, it was the Metroidvania era by far.
See, for me, I would say both of those are in the Metroidvania era, because those were always my cup of tea.
Yeah.
Not to say that the 8/16-bit era wasn't good, because, I mean, it started things. It's how everything was based on.
Mm-hmm.
But, yeah, unfortunately, the Lords of Shadow era is the lowest point, other than the lack of games for the past number of years. It's Lords of Shadow was ambitious. It was another, number one in the series kind of thing. It was a remake of one.
No, it was its own timeline. Gabriel Belmont ended up becoming Dracula in Lords of Shadow. It's its completely own timeline. It has nothing to do with the main timeline. There are characters who are in that game from other games, and they're completely different characters. Like Bronner and Ulrox, for example, or Cornell.
Yeah, the problem with that game was the combat. It really was. Like, some of it was fun, don't get me wrong. But between the loading screens, between the maps being super large with multiple loading screens and just confusion, and the combat could be fun, but it also wasn't anywhere near what I would call tight.
I don't know. I thought the combat was maybe the best part of at least the first game. I didn't really play the second. I saw a playthrough of it. But the first game I did play through. And I did have a fair bit of fun fighting things in it, because the last time I tried a 3D Castlevania was Curse of Darkness. And while that is a fun game, its combat is best described as slash things until they die.
Yeah.
Unless your familiar has already taken care of them. Because Hector and his familiar were so broken.
Yeah.
The thing about Lords of Shadow is that its combat was definitely inspired by character action games. And it was definitely more God of War than Devil May Cry, but it definitely felt like God of War more than anything else. How I think the game suffered is that Mercury Steam made a Belmont who is a lot more like Kratos than a Belmont. And that's kind of my disconnect with Lords of Shadow. That and the fact that it was way too long. Like, some of the boss fights were spectacular in that game. The boss fight against Malphus, the Black Crow, that thing was awesome. Like, that is actually one of my favorite fights in all of Castlevania. And I've played a lot of them. Like people like, I remember Legion from Symphony of the Night, or Granfaloon, and he was translated back then. No, I don't think he holds a candle to some of the fights in Lords of Shadow, to be honest with you.
No, all the boss battles in Symphony of the Night were good boss battles. But to say that they were on the same level as the bosses in any of the Lord of Shadow games, it's hard to compare a 2D battle like they had back then to the massive God of War landscape battles that you had in the later games, because they were spectacles.
I would argue the Symphony of the Night bosses were not good, mostly because they melted in seconds with any competency from the player. Like, my first run through the game, and I think the only time I ever game overed was in the Reverse Castle. Like, and none of the bosses stood in my way. Granfaloon / Legion was challenging when you were figuring him out, but he was just an HP sponge since most players get to him early.
Yeah.
And then go and fight other bosses they were supposed to fight first, like Ulrox, and then annihilate them in seconds, even if they're getting hit, because Ulrox just can't hurt you hard enough.
Yeah.
If you play the game by its rules and, don't equip the best stuff and try to dodge everything, then the boss fights are fine. But for the most part, they're just kind of those were really better iterated in the later Metroidvanias, I think.
Absolutely.
With Order of Ecclesia perhaps having the best ones of the Metroidvanias, in my humble opinion. Some of Portrait of Ruins are pretty good too.
Yep.
But yeah, no, you'd be hard to argue against the Metroidvania era being the most successful, even from a mechanical standpoint, right? Because that's brought in a lot of people. A lot of people are like, oh man, Castlevania 1's too hard for me. I don't know how to jump right. I'm gonna fucking do a game where I can level up and just out-level everything. That's a little bit of shade for me.
It's a little bit of shade. I understand where you're coming from, but, I mean, let's face it. Castlevania 1, for your average person, could be a pretty difficult game.
I mean, yeah, if they suck at video games.
It doesn't always have to be that they suck at video games. Let's face it, a lot of people just don't have the patience to work out all the mechanics, and that's a person problem. I'm not going to argue that.
I do think a game like that, and it was an earlier release, so this would never have happened, but they really needed a quick little tutorial that says, whipping takes time, jumping does not. Choose whether to whip a thing or jump over it.
Yeah.
And if that had come up first, a lot more people would be much more comfortable playing through that game.
Mm-hmm. Look, Castlevania 3 is one of my more favorite regular Castlevania games. But that game was hard.
That game was brutal.
And you only made it harder on yourself by having one of the other 3 characters that you could get. Like, you'd think, oh, just get Alucard and you can fly through everything. Yeah, you get hit once, you turn back into Alucard, and you fall into oblivion. Or, oh, I'll just climb on the roof. Oh, I got hit again, now I'm falling into oblivion. It just, that game was super hard, and you only ever made it harder on yourself. I love the branching paths and everything else to it, but over the years, I've only finished the game a handful of times, and only ever with your magic user.
Sypha. Sypha Belnadis.
Yes.
Speaking of Castlevania 3...
That's where I was going with this.
That was the basis for the Castlevania animated series on Netflix. A show that, by all rights, should have sucked. And then you watch the first episode and you're like, whoa, this is actually fucking awesome.
Fucking nailed it.
Now, there are some people who would argue it's not really Castlevania, it's kind of fanficky, it doesn't really follow the story of the games, and all I have to say to those people is that maybe go outside, maybe take a breath of air, maybe realize that you're a clown now, before too many people learn about it and you end up having nobody in your life. That show's awesome. Not without its problems, of course. But goddamn, man, the Castlevania animated series, I knew it was going to be something special when Lisa talked to Dracula, and then we got Dracula's grief right away, and you just hear his pain. In the games, Dracula is also a grieving man, but he has long since given way to blood and death.
Yes.
Whereas in the show, we get almost a character study in the first 2 seasons anyway of Dracula.
Yep.
Of a broken man who actually, as Alucard said it, and I'm paraphrasing here, died a long time ago, and that he needed to die, and he realized it, which is why he kind of let Alucard kill him, and when he came back to life in season 4, spoilers by the way, you get the impression that he's a reformed man who's not going to go back to his ways.
Granted, it's not so much that he's not going to go back to his ways, it's that his wife is there with him.
Yeah, Lisa's there!
And he has no reason to go back. Like, we actually don't even know if Dracula in season 4 is a vampire.
Yeah, we don't know.
We don't.
He sure looks like one.
He sure looks like it, but we don't, at no time during that period, do we see fangs.
You don't?
No.
Are you sure?
Yes.
Oh, wow.
Now they may have totally just, from the angles they had and everything else, they may have hidden it, but we don't know if Dracula's a vampire anymore.
Folks, if Dave ends up being wrong, just tear him apart in the comments.
I'm okay with that. I've watched this scene a number of times, and I don't remember seeing fangs once.
Maybe he's not. Maybe he got to live as a normal man. That does beg the question, though, of... We're not quite done talking about that series. Never mind. Let's not transition to Nocturne just yet.
Yeah.
Season 3 of the show was what I call the downer season. It was the one where things went wrong for our main characters. Kind of a post-Dracula world, but evil still exists. And then 4 brought us back to the triumph again, with their overcoming who I thought was a really awesome incarnation of death.
Yes.
And I know some people argued that, oh, death swears too much. They say the fuck word in Castlevania too much. And I don't get that criticism because it reminds me of the Bible thumper schoolyard kid who would tattle on all the other kids for swearing and somehow pretend that they're actually the mature one when they themselves are just at a different section of the kiddie table, tattling on the other people at the kiddie table, seething and coping at the fact that the adults don't take them seriously. I really liked swearing, smarmy, surly death myself. And that fight scene with fucking Trevor at the end. Oh my god, man.
Yeah.
In a show of amazing fight scenes, I think somehow that one just took the cake.
Yeah, it was really good, and the fact that they actually made you think he was dead
No, like
right up until basically the last minute was great. I mean, if we don't see Alucard in Nocturne, I'll be a little bit upset.
Well, yeah, we'll get to that because Nocturne is definitely taking its own liberties, especially since it's part of a timeline which didn't play out the way the games did originally, right? What really surprised me about Castlevania, the series, is that they not only took events from Castlevania 3, they took events from fucking Curse of Darkness. Yep. When we saw Hector and Isaac, I was like, what? Yep. They're introducing the Forge Masters? But this is also a source of contention, and one of the criticisms people have that I actually completely understand, and that's that while Isaac got a much better character arc than he did in Curse of Darkness, where he was just a raving lunatic.
Yeah.
In the show, he got, a real arc, a real
amazing voice acting,
an amazing voice actor, a progression that led him to becoming just a fully realized version of Isaac.
Yep.
Hector got shafted. Anyone who played Curse of Darkness as Hector, and I'm one of them, is probably like, oh man, really, Hector? Really, Hector? Like, I was waiting in season 4 for him to break out of his bonds and murder the shit out of those vampire fucking, out of the Vampirist Council.
Yeah.
And that never came. And I think that's such a shame. I was waiting for the moment when he would break out and it would start playing the Curse of Darkness music and he'd join Isaac to take down Camilla and then they'd both go to Dracula's castle to help in the final fight. But that didn't happen. And we instead got that very separate arc for Isaac and Hector that didn't end up intersecting too much other than the fact that Hector did warn Saint Germain about Varney, because Hector knew from the beginning Varney was death, right?
Yeah.
And that's really the only way it intersected.
Yeah, I always thought that it needed a season 5 to help wrap up their character arcs. But I'll admit, I did like the fact that, Hector was actually quite willing to settle down with one of the countesses there.
Oh, what the fuck was her name?
Yeah, I was gonna say Camilla, but that's not right.
No, that's Carmilla was the evil one.
Yeah.
Striga and her girlfriend were the other two. They're original characters. They weren't in the games. And then the one that Hector, had
the youngest one,
relationship with, I don't remember her name either, but there was a character in Curse of Darkness who was kind of like her.
Yeah.
Because in Curse of Darkness, Hector had found love, but then Isaac killed her, and that's what spurred Hector to go find and take revenge on Isaac.
Okay.
Then Isaac found another woman who he settled with, and he ended up realizing that the curse was making him angry, and...
Okay.
Long story.
That was not a game that I played or really followed, so really the animated series was my introduction to the characters, other than what you've told me. But I actually like how that ended, where he was willing to settle down with her and just, be together, and she's like, yeah, no, I'm not living in a cage, and just ended herself.
Man.
But I did want to see what he did after that.
Why is it that she didn't just burn into agonizing flame, and she managed to go out very calmly in the sun?
See,
when others exposed to the sun just ended up getting immolated in a pyre.
It makes me think, though, and I think they were going with an idea on that it depended on the vampire, how they went out when it came to the sunlight. Like, she was basically sacrificing herself in that case, and so she didn't go up in a pyre of flame like the more... I don't want to say more selfish, because she was selfish, but maybe the level of evil depends on, kind of like gasoline on their souls going up or something. I appreciate that she didn't go up like that. that she just went to dust and was gone. It made it a lot more poignant.
I suppose so. It still was an unsatisfying end for Hector's story.
Oh, it was.
Especially for anyone who liked him in Curse of Darkness. So that's a criticism that I think that is a valid one.
Mm-hmm.
Nocturne. Castlevania Nocturne.
Yeah.
The follow-up to that series where we focus on Richter Belmont now. Richter Belmont was the main character of... Oh, God. Okay, little history lesson. There is a game called Akumojo no Dracula X Chino Rondo, which got released on both the PC Engine CD, the system we knew here as the TurboGrafx CD.
Yep.
And it was also released on SNES. We only got the Super Nintendo version. It's a slightly different story with a non-playable Maria, but for the most part, it's still the same kind of idea. We never got Rondo of Blood. It was a game that I thought was mechanically worse than its Super Nintendo version, but definitely like aesthetically better because it had CD music and full cutscenes.
Yeah.
Which is why I think a lot of people like it for that reason alone. Its follow-up was Symphony of the Night, which we've already talked about.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what's interesting is that Symphony of the Night's title in Japan was, I believe, Nocturne in the Moonlight. So for this series to be called Castlevania Nocturne leads me to believe that we're not just going to get a rendition of Rondo of Blood. We're going to get a rendition of Symphony of the Night that involves Richter heavily. Now, what's interesting is that we are in a timeline where Dracula probably isn't the main threat, which is interesting to say the least, but there are other vampires, there are other forces of evil that Richter can definitely fight against, right? And what fascinated me the most about this trailer, I think, is that they added a new Belnadis character. It looked like there was a woman spellcasting like Sypha.
Yeah.
And it wasn't Maria, because we saw Maria, she was in her Dracula X Collection outfit in the trailer, and Richter is in a similar outfit to that as well. But we have a new Belnadis, so we're definitely getting a new take on the story. The French Revolution appears to be a big backdrop for this.
Yes.
Even though it was a backdrop in Rondo of Blood, it was not overtly any reason for the events of that game. Whereas here, it seems to be front and center.
Yes. Well, and it makes, the French Revolution makes a perfect backdrop because all the blood.
Yeah, all the blood and violence. It would be. I even think it was mentioned in the Dracula X manual that's partly why Dracula revived so easily this time, is because of the chaos amidst the French Revolution. Mm-hmm. But again, that it was not really part of the story beyond that. Here, it looks like the French Revolution is going to be a front and center plot point, right?
Yeah, and we don't need Dracula to be the enemy in this case, especially with the ending they gave us to the original series. Mm-hmm. Him and his wife, Linda, are able to go and live their lives. Happily. And more than likely, they would have stayed out of the limelight, disappeared to the four winds, and lived their lives simply. Or as simply as scientists could. So I wouldn't expect to find... it would be so stupid to have the two of them show up in Nocturne and have her be killed again.
Yeah, especially since Lisa's a human. I don't know how maybe she's immortal now, but
and
this is in the 1700s, whereas Castlevania 3 and the show was, I think, in the 1400s?
I long since stopped paying attention to the actual timeline. The dates, the times, and everything else, just... Okay, we got another Belmont, we got another non-Belmont, okay, let's do this. Kind of stuff. But unlike, if it is going to have Symphony of the Night as part of it, with Alucard there, Alucard's motivations are going to be very different this time.
Probably.
And again, I don't mind that. You can still have a Dracula-esque character. It doesn't have to be Dracula. That doesn't have to be his thing again.
There are a number of characters that could be the villain from the game, such as you could bring back Carmilla. You could revive Carmilla. You could you could bring Walter Bernhard, who in the games was the original vampire that Dracula stole the stone from.
Mm-hmm.
You could bring back an entirely new vampire character.
You could bring back death.
You could bring back a man who calls himself Dracula.
Yeah.
Who is just someone who stole the name.
Yeah,
these are all possibilities.
I'm looking forward to seeing what they do, even if it's only Rondo of Blood.
I suspect that we're going to get a version of events that's based on both games, but with Richter as the main character.
And that's
so maybe we'll get a portion where he gets mind controlled by Shaft, but it's maybe going to last an episode or two, and he's going to be the main character.
I mean,
again.
that's where it would be the best time to bring in Alucard to help out.
Well, maybe.
I could see them bringing Alucard in as a support character, just as he was to our original duo.
He could even be the character that he was in the Aria of Sorrow and Dawn of Sorrow games, where he's Genya Arikado,
Yes.
who's in a suit, who's clearly Alucard,
Yeah.
but he's in disguise. He could be that person here as a nod to the Sorrow games, right? There's a lot of possibilities, and the teaser shows impeccable animation,
Oh, God,
a great art style, fantastic voice acting, and more of what I loved about the original.
You know,
So-
I hate Netflix these days.
Yeah,
But,
scummy as shit.
I mean, they're scummy. They have canceled so many animation projects that I've wanted to continue.
Yeah.
And then they still give me little hints of awesomeness like this.
Yeah. It's
Still not going to be enough to get me to bring back my Netflix subscription, because fuck them.
Oh no, we're going to be watching this show on my Netflix. We're going to be watching it legally. And don't worry, Netflix. I'm not lending him the password. It's going to be at the same location, you fucks. Fuck off.
Okay, Castlevania 3. The guy who could go on the roof.
Grant Dynasty.
I am joining Grant's crew. Arr.
Gotcha. You want to be a real world and not digital pirate. I understand. Now, Grant was not in the animated series.
I was kind of sad at that.
There was a village of Dynasty,
Yes.
which was kind of the nod that, Grant was around. I thought he was going to be the pirate who took Hector across the thing, and he was going to be part of the plot that way. But nah. Pour one out for Grant, who didn't get to be part of the proceedings. Maybe next time there's a remake.
But after having seen the entire series, I mean, was there room for Grant in there?
I'm going to say there was, but I'm not. There are problems with that show. The lack of Grant, to me, is not one of them.
Yeah.
But that's another thing where if someone told me that they love Grant and the fact he wasn't there is why they didn't watch it, I don't think I could blame them that too much, right?
I kind of shake my head at that, but I'd be like, okay.
Who's
whatever.
a fan of Grant Dynasty?
Well, it's not just that. Grant would have been a nice addition, but with what we got, I can't see things changing all that much if Grant had been a character there.
Not to mention, we already have all the little children who eat glue sticks like they're chicken fries mad about the fact that characters swear in this. Grant Dynasty was a pirate. He was a sailor. He would have been swearing more than every other character combined.
Grant wasn't just a pirate; he was a motherfucking pirate.
Yeah, this man would every second word out of his mouth would be fuck.
Look, a lot of people are all butthurt over swearing when people are speaking and everything else. I get when every second word is a swear. It can annoy you, but this is a rated R show.
Yeah.
You gotta expect there's going to be some swearing, and quite honestly, get fucking over it.
It's just neo-Puritanism. It's the same shit the same reason why witches were fucking burned at the stake in Salem only for the modern day. Just neo-Puritanism.
Yeah, I wouldn't go quite that far, but
these are the same people who would have burned the witches. The people who are like, I know they shouldn't say the bad words because that makes my fifis hurt. These are the same people who would have burned witches at the stakes, who would have gone, yeah, I saw her conduct witchcraft, burn her. Same people. Nocturne's gonna be good.
it's gonna be animated great. It's gonna sound and look great. And based on what they did in the original, I have few doubts that I'm going to enjoy it.
Yeah. Or you have few doubts that you're not going to enjoy. If you had doubts you were going to enjoy it, then you wouldn't be watching it.
Sure.
Okay. Wait. Never mind. Dave, if you could have a dream Castlevania thing, whether it's a game, a movie, a TV show, or whatever, just Konami's like, Dave, we're giving you a team. Tell us what you want to do. We'll give you an appropriate team. All you get to do whatever you want, and we'll publish and release it.
I'm remaking Castlevania 1, 2, and 3 as a Symphony of the Night game.
Okay.
That's it.
That would be it? It would be 2D pixel art?
It would be... Wouldn't be 2D pixel art. It would be more like...
Guilty Gear?
No, the most recent one that we got from the creator of Castlevania. Damn it.
Bloodstained. Okay, so there's Bloodstained, Curse of the Moon 1 and 2. What was the Symphony of the Night one? Bloodstained.
It was the good Bloodstained game.
Shut up. Bloodstained, something of the night. It was a good but still inferior Bloodstained game, paling behind the Curse of the Moon games.
Right. I would want it in that style, but with more of his. The only thing I wish that game did differently is that it was a little bit more dark and gothic.
You didn't think it was dark and gothic enough?
No, I didn't.
Okay.
I enjoyed that game greatly. I thought the art style was good.
We got to get the title right. We can't just keep going here without knowing the title. Hang on.
I told you it was the good Bloodstained game.
Shut up.
It was the non-pixel art Bloodstained game.
Ritual of the Night.
There we go.
The game that took inspiration from Symphony of the Night, but ended up actually being more like one of the Sorrow games with the soul mechanic.
Very much so. Very much so.
You could get a Valmanway, though. It wasn't called that, but...
still one of the best weapons in the game.
Yeah. Easily the best weapon in the game, but...
I would want a game like that, but following 1, 2, and 3.
Okay. Yeah, cool. I'd play that.
And I mean, 3... With being able to do the different characters from 3 and everything else, I think that would be one hell of a neat game. It wouldn't have to be one game. You could still remake each one on their own, but it would be in the Symphony of the Night style. That would be my dream recreation.
Cool. Yeah, I'd play it.
Yeah, I bet you would.
My dream Castlevania game would be called Castlevania: The Last Belmont.
Okay.
And it would be...
So a new game.
It would be a new game.
Okay.
It would be a 2D game with visuals that are at least on par with, like, a Guilty Gear.
Okay.
It would star Julius Belmont, who is the Belmont from the Sorrow games.
Okay.
And the story would be, because a little bit of history here, after Dawn of Sorrow, there was a radio drama that talked about what happened next, and that Julius was looking for a new successor because there were no more Belmonts. So he was looking for a successor to the whip.
Mm-hmm.
I would have it so that the successor didn't pan out and the whip came back to him. And there was some threat to the world, and old man Julius would have to fight it. But the game would actually, because we never got a game about the Battle of 1999, which Julius was the guy to finally kill Dracula.
Yeah.
So the game would start in the future, but as the narrative continued, it would be level-based, with pits and shit, classic, but with, like, 8-way whipping, cool, double jumping, like, great movement options, just a blast of a game to play. The story would go back and forth between the modern era of Julius Belmont, Old Man Julius, then he would reminisce about the Battle of 1999, and then we'd get to play a stage of young Julius going through, and we would go back and forth between them, and it would tell the story about, Julius's thoughts, his final battle with Dracula, and the ultimate culmination would be that because the whip in the games has the spirit of Leon Belmont's wife in it, and that she's the one who kept the vengeance alive against vampires, and that's why she lets Belmonts wield her, that eventually Julius would realize there are forces on Earth that have fought vampires. It's time for the whip to rest. And that would be the ending of the game. He would overcome whatever the final enemy is. realize he was going to be the last Belmont, lay the whip to rest, move on with his life. That would be called Castlevania: The Last Belmont. That would be my dream Castlevania game.
Okay.
We'd get the 1999 stuff, and we'd get a conclusion to Julius Belmont. And the Belmonts as a whole, and the vampire killer whip itself.
So he would, in the end, destroy the whip and let it end.
I imagine that he would do some ritual to release the spirit so that she could move on.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
That would be my dream Castlevania game. Konami, have your people contact my people. Dave, we still have time, believe it or not. We still have a good, 20 minutes. So we could wrap it up now, but do we have more to talk about in Castlevania? We could talk about what Castlevania influenced, games that were offshoots or that came from it. Okay, let's talk about Bloodstained. We have 3 Bloodstained games, 2 of which draw clear inspiration from Castlevania 3, and 1 which draws clear inspiration from the Metroidvanias. And Igarashi is even the guy behind Ritual of the Night, which I thought by now would have gotten a sequel.
Yeah, it took them forever to get the additional characters in there. Now, don't get me wrong, playing that game with the additional characters they've added really does change how you play the game.
Oh yeah, no, I liked playing as Zangetz because he's the main character of the Cursed games, and I just really like him as well. Since the Cursed games never had voice acting, you don't get to hear David Hayter in them because he's the guy who plays Zangetz, right? But yeah, man, I would love a Ritual of the Night sequel, to be honest with you.
And it makes me wonder if they're not working on a sequel. We haven't heard anything from Igarashi in a long time.
Yeah, I wonder too, to be honest. And I wonder what the story would even be, because so far, every Bloodstained game has kind of been in its own canon. The events of the Curse of the Moon games don't really acknowledge Ritual of the Night.
Yeah.
And in fact, the main character of Ritual in the Night is playable in Curse of the Moon. She is one of the main characters in that game. So, in that timeline, Ritual of the Night doesn't happen. And in fact, Curse of the Moon to lead to 2, you have to get the good ending of 1 and pretend that Zangetz didn't die in it. And then it links perfectly.
Okay.
It's weird that way, right? However, Curse of the Moon 2 has one of my favorite moments in gaming, and that's when you have to go to the moon, because it turns out the demon's fortress is on the moon, and the final boss, Zangetz cleaves it in half along with the moon!
Of course he does.
It's awesome. Curse of the Moon 2 also has one of my favorite characters in a video game, Hachi. He's a corgi piloting a mecha who is just the best character in a video game. He's strong, he's durable, he can hover, and whenever the mecha blows up, he hops out harmlessly. No one hurts the corgi. There's even a scene where Miriam is petting him. That's her name, Miriam.
So there is no confirmation so far, but documents have confirmed a second version in development.
Another reason why I kind of like Curse of the Moon more is because Miriam and Zebel, that was the bad guy in Ritual, right? That Miriam tried to save.
Yeah.
He's playable in these games, and he's not corrupted, and he, in fact, gets to live on. So it's cool that character got what I think is a better fate. Also, the Glasses Girl got a better fate, too, because she was a straight villain in Ritual, but she was a hero in Curse 2, and, again, never fell to evil.
Yeah, I didn't like the fact that she ended up being a bad guy in the game.
She has the same backstory in Curse of the Moon 2.
Yeah. But
she just never fell to the corruption of it because she decided that it would be better to just kill demons and not become one.
Okay.
And this is why I'm saying, what would the story of Ritual 2 be? Would it continue the first? Or would it just be a whole new timeline again? Because it seems none of these games care to be in the same timeline as each other. Which is fine, by the way. I don't think they have to adhere to a timeline, you know?
Well, I think it'd be better for a sequel to it to be a continuation to the first game. Just because, the demons were let out.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like when you killed your brother Well, it wasn't really your brother. Your friend that you stopped her when you killed the girl with glasses, that stopped anything there. Like, there are still demons in the world that are there because of, the scientists' stupidity.
One thing that is kind of missing from these games, all three of them, is we don't really have a Dracula. We don't have the mastermind who is smooth and suave, and you could just lose yourself in his voice if it wasn't for the fact that he was about to kill you.
Yeah, we kind of had the ability to have that, but
in Zanget's final boss, in his mode, in Ritual of the Night, the final boss is Miriam, a corrupted Miriam.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not really the same thing.
No, it's not. Like, she could be a really good villain. Like, you could do a sequel to the game where she does end up being corrupted, but I don't know how great that would be. That, your hero from the first game becomes your villain in the second.
I mean, Nier and the Drakengard games in general don't give a shit. They'll base a new game off of whatever bad ending from the last game they want. So, whatever.
Yeah, I know.
And again, the Curse games and Ritual of the Night don't even follow the same timeline.
No, they don't.
And once again, within Curse, to make them fit, you have to ignore a detail.
Yeah.
So, but still, though, that was just one kind of thing that Castlevania inspired. There were other things. I would argue that Ninja Gaiden was probably very much inspired by Castlevania.
You think?
Similar idea. While you were much faster on your feet, you had a melee attack, you had sub-weapons, you had a fairly difficult platforming challenge, you had 3 games, you had demonic entities you were fighting, albeit in the modern day as Ryu Hayabusa, and not throughout history as a Belmont. And you had a much more involved story, although the Ninja Gaiden games really, for an NES game, were very ambitious in terms of cutscenes and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And you could imagine that if the same team was behind Castlevania, that maybe they would have had a big cutscene presence too. But I would argue the Ninja Gaiden games were very much influenced by Castlevania. I think that influence is absolutely, overt there. Maybe not the modern Ninja Gaiden games.
Well, no.
Maybe not Dead or Alive.
Might be a little bit of a stretch to say that Castlevania influenced Ninja Gaiden, because, it was a side-scrolling platformer.
But it was a side-scrolling platformer that emphasized precision and realizing that your attack was slower than your jump and when to choose what. And Ninja Gaiden, at least the first game, was very similar in that regard. There were some enemies you needed to slash and some enemies you needed to just jump over and be on your way. Later Ninja Gaiden.
And some people just never got over that.
And it's a shame, really, because it's kind of like how there's a shmup I've played recently called Gunvein.
Yeah.
It's by the guys who did Gunlord, if you remember that video the Best Friends did. And it's a bullet hell shmup, but what they do is they actually teach you shmup fundamentals in a tutorial. They teach you techniques that not only apply to this game, but to any other game. You can go through the tutorial here and apply what you learned in it in Jamestown. Yeah. Or in Bug Princess, or whatever cave shooter you want to play.
Let's face it, any game today that doesn't have some sort of intro/tutorial how to handle these mechanics has already failed.
And if they made, let's just say, for the sake of argument, Konami made a new kind of classic style Castlevania in the NES vein of, pits, platforming, precision. I think a very simple introduction to the difference between jumping, whipping, and sub-weaponing and when to use each would go a long way towards making a lot of people who think they're bad at video games realize they're not as bad as they think.
Yeah. No, if you can't show how to handle your game's mechanics on a basic level, you have failed.
Street Fighter 6, you would appreciate this. Not only are there basic tutorials and combo challenges for each character, but each character has multiple how to play chapters where the character themselves narrates how to use every one of their skills.
Good.
But in terms of practical application, not just that DJ wants to charge back and forward to do air slash. No, it's when will you do this in a match?
Yeah.
Oh, do it when you're at this range, or do the fake version and then go for a throw. Do the double version, but don't do it if they're going to jump in on you. Shit like that is what the game shows you. Like, that's what a tutorial should do. It shouldn't be like forcefully pausing you and telling you that A jumps. No, a tutorial should be like, press A to jump, and here's when you might want to use that jump.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that was actually a problem with the Lord of Shadow games, is you had to work out a whole bunch of that yourself, between all the weapons, the skills. There were some times in Lord of Shadow that I was at low life, and getting back my life it was easier just to restart the chapter.
Really?
Yeah.
But you could use the one mode where attacks just refilled your life. Because there is the light and dark mode, and I forget which one, but one of them would make your attacks not stronger, but refill your life. Yeah. And then the other one would just make you stronger, and oftentimes that was the better thing to go to, because enemies who are dead can't hurt you.
Yeah, I don't remember what the scenario was or anything else, but there was a couple times throughout there that I remember getting stuck with such low life that I just could not continue, and eventually I just said, F it.
You should have toughed it out. Should have toughed it out and tried like a man.
Yeah. No, I've long since given up on, if I'm not finding a game fun, and I can slog through a lot of stuff. I've done Dark Souls games.
Yeah.
But if I'm not having fun for long periods of time without even, a little bit of, ooh, okay, that was awesome, I'm out. I'm just out.
What you just said reminds me of three things. One, we didn't talk about the N64 games. They probably fall under the classic style because they weren't really Metroidvania, but they had Metroidvania elements, because each level was kind of its own little mini Metroidvania, but then you would move on. Two, I said three things, and now I'm not remembering the third. Oh no. Okay, fuck it. We're just going to get to two. Dark Souls is kind of something Castlevania influenced. If you think about it, Demon Souls is kind of the modern idea. Souls-like games in general is kind of the modern idea of NES Castlevania.
Just NES games in general, really.
And what I mean by that is that your controls are very tight, your movement is very kind of limited, but you are given all the tools you need to beat the overwhelming challenges thrown at you in a system where you are punished for failing. And in a way, these are very much like classic Castlevania. And you're right, like a lot of old NES games in general, the whole live system is probably what influenced a lot of Souls-like. But I think there's enough there that if Demon Souls ended up being a Castlevania branded game, like if it was like Castlevania Demon Souls, I don't think that would have been a big stretch. I think it would have been easy to see that as a Castlevania game.
Truthfully, you could make a Castlevania Dark Souls game. No problem.
Mm-hmm. Maybe that's what Lords of Shadow should have been.
And honestly, if they do it in the same sort of style as, say, Jedi Survivor did, go for it.
Mm-hmm.
If you're going to do it like a Dark Souls game, like a pure Dark Souls game, please don't.
The upcoming Lies of P, which is supposed to be a Souls-like, that game looks tight, and it kind of gives me a bit of a Castlevania vibe, even though it's definitely more of a steampunk Pinocchio retelling. Yes. There's a demo, I haven't tried it yet.
Going into Dark Souls games, I know one thing. I'm going to play this game, I'm going to hate it, I'm going to enjoy the challenge, and I may never finish this game. And I'm fine with that.
I remember the third thing I was going to say.
Yeah.
It's totally okay to play a game, realize it's not for you, and move on.
Yeah, like Elden Ring. I am not done with that game. I have fucking definitely not finished the game. But if I never touch it again, I truly wish it well. Because I enjoyed both the frustration and the challenge that I had with the game. Do I think the Jedi Dark Souls games are better? I do, for one reason. I had no problem getting through the challenge and the situations over and over again to learn stuff to finish that game. But I'm biased that way because I love Star Wars.
I think, too, there's a way to make it feel good. I say this all the time about Blizzard, that however Blizzard manages to botch their games, one thing they know how to do, and they've known all the way back since Lost Vikings, is how to make a game just feel good.
Yeah.
It's why I came back to WoW so many times. It's why when I played FF14, I was like, this makes me miss WoW. I don't play it now because I only like to do one MMO at a time, and I am, despite how the flaws of this game, I love New Genesis.
Mm-hmm.
But fucking, it reminds me of that where the solid basis is what will keep people coming back. And I think if you've never, out there, if you've never played a Castlevania game before, try playing Castlevania 1 on NES. I legit feel that when you get your hands on it, you will realize that this is a masterfully made game right away. I think you'll play through level 1. It might kill you. It might not. You might be good enough. And you'll realize, oh, wow, I see the design here. This early game wasn't just trying to be another Atari game or whatever, the NES arcade port at the time. It was trying to be a little more ambitious mechanically. And I think that's ultimately Castlevania's legacy to me. As much as I like the animated series, and as much as I have no doubt that Nocturne is going to be amazing, Castlevania for me is about mechanics wrapped up in a gothic, horror-esque, but fun horror-esque shell. Like the kind of thing Diablo would have been if it was like maybe less about the dark fantasy and more about guitar riffs.
Yeah. It's Castlevania is unique in its setting and has gone on to influence so many of the dark gothic style games.
There's probably some Castlevania in Diablo. I bet you go interview people who worked on the Diablo games, they'll probably say, oh yeah, Castlevania influenced this part of the design.
Yeah, I don't see why not.
I'd believe that in a moment.
Yeah. No real whips in the game, though, is there?
No, they really aren't. Do we talk about Getsu Fumaden, a game that was kind of inspired by Castlevania?
Kind of a cheat, though, because it was made by the same guys, and it was
technically the same universe.
Yeah, it kind of a cheat.
That got an actual new game lately, a roguelite. And it seemed really good, but I haven't played much of it. It's not as good as Hades. Hades is kind of my roguelite gold standard right now. And even that, I eventually, after I did my 32 heat hell mode run, I was like, you know what? I'm good.
Yeah.
Wait for that Hades too. We're dragging it out now. Any final thoughts on Castlevania?
Well, I mean, I will bring up that Castlevania has a module in Dead Cells.
Oh yeah, there's that Dead Cells Castlevania thing.
That was neat too.
I saw it. I saw videos of it, even though Dead Cells is weird because it's totally the kind of game I should have liked, and there's nothing bad about it. I really do wish it well. But, and from what I hear, it's done well, so...
Oh god, with the amount of,
You got a Castlevania crossover.
Extra content they've done, now the Castlevania crossover, which made perfect sense. Adding the weapons in, adding the, you get to go into the castle a little bit, the enemies and everything else. Yeah, it was a neat module.
It's stuff like that makes me have some hope that Konami hasn't forgotten, and that somewhere within the corporate NFT hoarding, soulless Konami boardroom,
pachinko machine,
there are a few people there who are like, I miss Castlevania. Let's give these fat guys what they want. Because they listen to our podcast.
Of course.
Scenario. Let's give them what they want and make both of their dream games. Get our people to contact their people.
Yeah, you could hope.
And then they'll call us and I'll be in my underwear playing Hearthstone Battlegrounds. Be like, hello, this is Konami. Fuck you, prank caller. Click. Idiot. That's what I want to live through. Folks, what do you think of Castlevania in general? Please, I implore you, let us know. Leave a comment on this if you're seeing it on YouTube, or you can leave us a voicemail that we answer on our next episode. If you go to twofatguystalk.com, we are Two Fat Guys Talk. We have an irregular release schedule. We release when we feel like it, and no more or less. Please, listen. Be good to each other. Stay safe. Whip demons. And by demons, I don't mean your little brother. I mean, oh god, that implies that we're aiming this at children, and no children should be listening to this.
No. Tune in next time, everyone.
Goodbye.